Hello, everyone. We're going to start our educational presentation, though I want to welcome Celia, who's the president of the church, who is kind enough to rent us space, who would like to say a few words.
Very few words, just welcome to our beautiful hall. And I think we have a lot of like-minded people here with you all here and with our congregation. Thank you for showing up. Let's keep working together. Thank you.
So my name is Kay. I'm the founder of GAIN. I'm so glad you're here today. I want to thank you for attending this month's educational seminar. We have these every month, titled The Defunding of NIH and What It Means to You, brought to you by us, GAIN. We are passing an envelope for donations, which will be sent to the ACLU, who are doing such important work in our courts, including defending our rights for due process. We are living in a critical time in our nation's history, and today you'll hear from Dr. Rachael Sirianni, professor of neurosurgery at UMass Chan Medical School. Today, Rachael will educate us about what NIH does, discuss the defunding of our healthcare, future treatments, and cures for such things as cancer and Alzheimer's, and accordingly, the decline of our state's future academic, medical, and economic successes. I often hear people say things are bad, but what can I do to make a difference? Well, instead of just wringing our hands or hiding from the truth, every one of us can mobilize and work together to make a difference. This is what the colonists did in 1774. On October 14th, 1774, the new Continental Congress met and adopted the Declaration of Rights and Resolves. 6 days later, they passed the Continental Association, a colony-wide boycott on British goods. And on the very next day, October 21st, the word liberty was first displayed on a flag raised by colonists in Taunton, Massachusetts, in defiance of a powerful king and British rule. Today, this fight means staying informed, communicating our expectations to our politicians, financially supporting organizations and individuals who support democracy, participating in economic and other types of boycotts, phone banking, canvassing, and being part of constant and numerous peaceful protests in numbers so large that they cannot be ignored. This is how we saved democracy and how women won the right to vote. The labor movement succeeded, civil rights were passed, and the Vietnam War ended. I also hear that we already fought for our rights and democracy, so why do we need to do it again? Well, unfortunately, this will always be the fight that is required repeatedly because there will always be forces at play who want to take more so that the rest of us get less, much less. I fear this is just our human nature at play and is the founding principle of all oligarchies, the control of the many by a powerful few. The good news is that both South Korea and Serbia have recently fought back against tyranny, and they won. This fight is on us now, but there is strength in numbers, and courage is contagious. Just ask the colonists. Thanks again, and please welcome our guest, Dr. Rachael Sirianni.
Thank you so much, Kay, both for inviting me here today and also for your organizing efforts in general through GAIN. Very grateful to be a part of the organization. And also a thank you for everybody's time in showing up today. And I'm hoping that I can help you learn a little bit about what's going on and take those messages to your communities. My name's Rachael. I'm a faculty member at UMass Chan. I'm a professor of neurosurgery and also vice chair of research for neurosurgery, which means that I play a central role in education and research training activities within my department. I also work through UMass on what are called workforce development programs, which are really about more broadly engaging individuals throughout their professional careers in science and medicine. I definitely need to establish I do not speak on behalf of my institution. I give that context so that you can understand a little bit where I'm coming from, but the opinions that I express are my own. I could stand here and speak straight for 40 minutes. I hate doing that. I would love for this to be a really dynamic thing. And I'm going to give you an outline for the topics that I'll go through. And I hope that you'll stop me and raise your hand or shout out a question, and we can really view this as a collaborative effort to talk about these issues and learn from one another. So my approach to this, I wanted to introduce myself and my own academic journey, just a tiny bit about the science that we do. And then I really wanted to spend some time educating everybody on, what is the structure of science in America? How do we fund science? What's the role of NIH? And why is this the foundation of medicine? Why should we care about this? And from there, we'll go on to what's actually happening in terms of the specific attacks and hopefully some discussion about what we can all do. So I'm one academic. I feel a little bit awkward putting this up here. It's a bit of my professional journey, but I wanted to emphasize kind of what the scope of an academic career is. So I started my undergraduate at Arizona State University in 1998. Many thanks for STEM outreach programs that were federally funded, Pell Grants, and federally subsidized student loans that enabled me to proceed through my education. I graduated from Arizona State in 2003. I started research right in the last year of my undergraduate degree, went through a master's, PhD, and then what's called a postdoctoral fellowship at Yale. And then in 2011, at that point, I was ready to start my first faculty position. So it's about 13 years of training. This is very typical. This is actually a fairly short amount of time from start to finish to shift into a faculty career. My faculty career started in, it's called a Baroneurological Institute. It's a clinical research institute in Arizona. And I've moved a few times, moved my family. You can see I added a little bit of personal timeline there during all of this, had some kids, and got married and had some kids. And really, our lives have been driven by my professional needs, moving from location to location to establish my research program. In addition to the federal sources that I already mentioned, my education was also funded by what are called training grants, which are specific investments made by NIH to fund doctoral work, pre-doctoral work, and postdoctoral work as well. And so I'm very grateful for that. The awkward part is I wanted to emphasize what one academic career can do. So I have had the absolute privilege to be a steward for about $10 million in research funding. That is something that I and every other scientist I know take incredibly seriously. Every dollar that we utilize, we use that towards causes and activities that we believe passionately will have a positive impact on human health. From that funding, I've trained over 90 individuals, graduated 5 PhDs, published a bunch, started 2 clinical trials, did some patents. This is very typical for an academic research program. You take those funds and you really try to disseminate that science and generate some impact. So what do we do? I'm a drug delivery scientist, and drug delivery science is kind of about understanding how molecules move through the body, how drugs distribute in the body, and then engineering better ways to get more of that drug to a target tissue to make more tolerable and a more effective therapy. And when I talk to people about drug delivery, I like to remind them that this is something human beings have been experimenting with for a long time. We have long observed, even before we had a written history, that how a substance is exposed to the body really changes how it acts in the body. And the best example I like to give is a nicotine cigarette. So if you smoke a cigarette, you're going to get a brief dopamine rush, a short subjective high, and then after that point, it'll fade off. If you took that same cigarette and you ate it, that cigarette would actually be fatal. And so the idea is that how these substances are exposed to our bodies really matters. The part of drug delivery that I work in is what's called biomaterials for drug delivery. And this is a very technology engineering focused endeavor. I'm a biomedical engineer by training. This is the use of material implants, coatings, and emulsifications and other kinds of material systems to change how drugs move through the body and how they are exposed to the body. My group works on nanoparticles for drug delivery, so everybody's heard of the COVID vaccine. That's one example of a nanoparticle system. I'll tell you a little bit more about the medical science that we work on, but we work on knowing how to make nanoparticles, how to modify their surface, and how to engineer them really for effective delivery. And I'd like to point out 2 purposes for this field. So One is about how that drug is exposed to the body, so the kinetics of how it's exposed. Everybody knows, when you take a medicine, you have to take that medicine frequently, right? So whether it's a intravenous injection or a pill, if it's, say, a chemotherapeutic agent, you're going to take that agent, it will distribute through the body, and it's going to be dosed at a high enough level that it's going to kind of transiently move through a toxic range, fall back through a therapeutic and effective range, and then the concentration will drop off, and you have to get another infusion or take the pill again. And the idea with a biomaterial system is that we prolong how that drug is exposed to the body. And so now we can spend more time in a therapeutic window and less time within that toxic window. The second thing we do with nanoparticles is we engineer the surface of the nanoparticle to drive its distribution to different regions in the body to try to change where that drug goes within the body. We are what's called a therapeutic development lab, and so that means that we are designing better medicine and optimizing the design of this medicine to translate it into clinical practice. We work primarily on pediatric brain tumors, and specifically, it's the last bit of science I'm going to tell you about, but it's something I'm passionate about, so I'll explain it. Specifically, we work on a feature of pediatric brain cancer called leptomeningeal metastasis, or LM. This is a feature of cancer that occurs in many different cancer types, so breast cancer, melanoma, liver cancer as well, all exhibit this form of metastasis. And LM involves the disbursement of malignant cells all across the surfaces of the brain and spinal cord, and it's very difficult to treat. You can see in this image here, this example, this is a child's brain with an MRI, and this white area here in the back of the head, that's a brain tumor. It's a type of tumor called medulloblastoma. And that tumor has gotten very large, and it's gotten so large that it started to become exposed to the cerebrospinal fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord. And once that happens, those metastatic cells are able to move into that CSF and then begin to move across the surfaces of the brain and spinal cord. And this is the scientific topic that I'm really most passionate about. And so what my lab works on is designing nanoparticle systems that can be administered directly to CSF in order to deliver more chemotherapeutic agents directly to those tumor sites and to spare children the devastating effects of radiation. So this is a bit of the science that we do. Oh, wait, I lost it. So moving on, let's talk about how science is done in America. So the first thing I want to point out is I've given you a little bit of a flavor of the kind of work that we do. There's all kinds of science that gets done, and it's important to understand the value of that scientific endeavor at every end of the spectrum. So in the very early stages, we have what's called basic science or discovery work. And basic science is science where we don't really know if it's going to be useful yet. We're maybe observing physiological phenomenon or trying creative, new, innovative ideas. A basic science program is one where you're in a discovery phase where you don't know for sure if it's going to impact health or well-being. All the way up, so that's kind of at the T0 phase here. These are a little bit too small for you to see. So you've got basic science all the way on the left. And then those basic science discoveries are then leveraged to develop new therapies and new technologies. And we take those discoveries, we validate them in animal models, we develop therapeutic or diagnostic approaches, we test across multiple species, we learn about how to scale that into humans, and ultimately we have to patent and design technologies that will be commercially viable. And those scientific activities occur at every phase along the spectrum within academic institutions in the US. Everything that I'll be talking about today covers that full phase. On the bottom, I have a little bit of a spectrum for the types of institutions that exist. So when you think about academia, everybody kind of has a different picture in their mind. Some of my relatives think that I teach undergrads. So when I say I'm a science professor, they say, "What class do you teach?" I don't actually teach undergrads because I work at a medical school. But we have everything all the way from undergraduate serving, low research institutions, very educationally oriented institutions, all the way through increasingly research intense environments, which moves through a traditional, what we call an R1 research model. So when you think about Harvard or Arizona State University, kind of the traditional university engaged in both teaching and research, up to medical schools and hospitals and research institutions that are entirely research dedicated. So what I want to highlight about this is really all of this science matters. All of this science has value, and it's all interdependent. So I would not be able to do my translationally oriented work on developing new therapies if not for the other scientists who had done the basic discovery work decades ago that laid the foundation for what we would like to do. And so I really just want to emphasize the diversity of science that goes on. So our government here in America plays a really, really pivotal role in research. And it's actually kind of a unique model relative to what existed prior to this investment. So the history of this is that after the Second World War, the American government decided that they wanted to invest in science and technology, and they wanted to do it in a way that it wasn't being done in government labs, at least not exclusively. It was actually a very kind of free market approach. They wanted to disseminate these investments across different institutions within the United States. And at that point in time, there was a model that was developed for NIH and other federal agencies whereby there are two kinds of funding. So these agencies will fund what are called direct costs, or DCs. Those are the costs of doing the actual research. That's me paying my personnel, purchasing mice, purchasing supplies, what you think of when you think of a research activity. So investigators apply for these direct costs, these DCs, to fund specific projects. But what's unique about how America does science is that on top of the direct costs, institutions are awarded what are called indirect costs, or IDCs. And I'm going to talk a little bit more later about exactly what IDCs constitute. But the idea was that when the government was investing in specific research projects, they would also invest in the infrastructure. And that the more active research institutions would develop these deep, specialized capabilities that would allow us to engage in collaboration and scientific innovation that would not otherwise be possible. So this model for investing in science really relies on a close relationship between the National Institutes of Health, academic institutions, and more translationally oriented medical institutions, where NIH is really starting this investment in order to grow a fundamental infrastructure to do science and technology in our country. And these investments are what have allowed our country to be the global leader in science and medicine. This is one of the few things that's indisputable. We can argue about, America's leadership at this point on many topics, whether we are still a leader. But up until now, science is something that America has done extraordinarily well at a global scale. So science is really entrepreneurial by design. And the best analogy I can give is that being a scientist is really being a small business owner. I am, operating independently on my own, and I am required to support my research activities and to raise funds to do my research. So faculty are generally, we are hired on the basis of the strength of our ideas, about whether our work will be impactful, about whether it will be fundable, about whether we're going to do something that's useful for society. We get hired by an institution, and that institution will grant us what are called startup funds. So it's a pocket of money, a bucket of money that's available to launch our research program. And we use that money to hire technicians and graduate students, to purchase equipment, to purchase supplies, and to conduct the first experiments we need to do to test our hypotheses, to test whether our ideas are going to be viable. Once we spend through our startup funds, there's no other money for us. So scientists are generally spending the first about 3 to 4 years of their career bit panicked, I can say that with a smile, having been through it myself, really, really pressuring and pushing hard to advance their scientific program to the point at which it can be funded by external sources. And once you get past that startup funding phase, the only way really that you can fund your program is through writing grants and receiving grants. There are some internal funding mechanisms within institutions, but really the vast majority of funding has to come from the outside. In running a research laboratory, I'm not sure that people realize that scientists are actually responsible for raising all of the funds necessary to do their work. That includes my own salary. So depending on where I work, if I'm at an undergraduate institution, I have to raise about 25% of my own salary. If I'm at a research institution, a medical school, typically it's about 50%. Some medical schools go as high as 95%. So we actually pay our own salaries through the grants that we apply for. And we also pay the salaries of all of the employees and trainees that work in our lab, including graduate students, which actually do an enormous amount of scientific work very, very cheaply because they are earning their degree as they are doing this work. So, the analogy I like to make is to really think about how we would plow and seed a field. So NIH and the federal government, they're kind of prepping the scape for this, right? So they're plowing the field, they're making the soil fertile so that it's a good place to land. The institutions are responsible for planting and maintaining the fields. So they hire academics, they provide them with infrastructure and resources that we need to do our work, and then they allow us to move forward with our independent research programs. Faculty are the ones that grow the crops. We advance our ideas based on our knowledge of the field and based on what we believe will be most impactful, because all funding is judged by impact. So even though we're reaching for grants, we're being judged as we submit these grants on the question of, will this be better for health, for society, for our capability? And so that's the part, of course, where the research gets done. Ultimately, the academic work, the research that's done at these institutions forms the foundation for the technologies that industry then takes into a commercially viable product. So I have patented multiple things, and then we take those ideas and we advertise them to companies, and we try to get the companies to license the patent so that they will then take that product forward and create something that's commercially viable and can be used to diagnose or treat human health. Any questions so far? I'm speaking fast. Okay, please interrupt me. The thing that we know, there's a lot of challenges to this model. I could give you lots of critiques about, things that I would like to see work better or do better. But the truth is it works, and it works extraordinarily well. And one of the first impacts of NIH funding is to understand that NIH funding is an enormous economic driver. This statistic on the left here, it's not up for debate. This is something that everybody agrees on. Every dollar that is invested by NIH returns $2.46 in economic activity. That's true in Massachusetts, that's true across our country. It's also true that the vast majority of therapeutic approaches have been developed with explicit support from NIH. So you can see in this example, 354 out of 356 drugs that were approved between 2010 and 2018, those drugs were funded by NIH grants, the initial work or some aspect of their development. And again, I want to emphasize that the way that NIH does this is really in two buckets. One is the actual scientific project, the funds that I manage, the people that I hire, the supplies that I purchase. But the other is making sure that there is a context in which that work can be done. And that's where these indirect costs come in. Some of you have probably heard about IDCs in the news, and we're going to talk a little bit later about what's happening with those. This is one of the most compelling things I've ever seen, and it's a little bit hard. You're going to have to trust me. It's a weird graph. It's what you're looking at. Along the top in the columns are dates, so 1910, 1930, 1950, all the way up to 2010. And what this is doing is it's showing you the number of Nobel laureates, Nobel Prizes that were awarded by country. The top row is actually the United States. Each of these little mini rows is a different Nobel Prize. And you can see I've boxed off the United States there, and the other box I have is Germany. You want to guess what happened to shift academia and academic success from Germany to the United States? It happened explicitly in the 1940s and 50s. So Germany and much of Europe saw an exodus of academics as they were persecuted, fleeing the country, fleeing authoritative rule, and the United States at that point, again, began plowing its fields and saying, look, we want to support this infrastructure. Come here, do your science. And it's been enormously successful. Again, this is a very compelling figure, I think. Yeah. Yep.
I don't know if this is going to be a welcome question, but since the percentage is so high of, what does it say, approved by the FDA,
the drugs,
right?
Yeah.
If the NIH has funded the research, isn't there some kind of control that the government would have over if they're providing the information from the research to the big pharma companies?
Yeah, that interface of the IP is what you're at, like the technology, the patents, and the...
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Isn't there a way that they control the pricing to the consumers and, aftermarket?
Yeah, so I'm going to address two parts of it. The first part about kind of what those relationships look like, and then the second part of the meat of your question of can we do anything. So the question is about, look, we've made these investments in all of this foundational science, and then these patents come through, and then companies take those technologies and they earn money off of it. Well, we live in a capitalist society, right? This is the model, is that if there is not income, if there's not a financial incentive from that patent, that company will not be incentivized to then invest the millions of dollars needed to bring it to market. So my first comment is going to be that I do believe that's a necessary aspect of drug development in our country, which is that at a certain point we do have to let go of that technology and allow it to be something that can be financially and commercially viable. But that's not to say that institutions or our government don't benefit. So institutions who hold these patents, those licenses return income to those institutions, which then take that income and reinvest it in the scientific endeavor. The second thing that happens is NIH actually does share patents with companies and investigators that it funds. And the irony is that the conservative right have actually attacked this, and they have said that it is a sign of kind of like an incestuous relationship, that they're sharing patents together. But in fact, it's getting at exactly what you asked about, which is the NIH was involved in the development of that technology, invested the money in the development of that technology, and therefore should be a part of receiving funds from the commercialization of that technology. To the meat of your question, is there anything that we can do to control drug pricing? I don't know that that will be the most direct route to influence drug pricing, because the journey of a technology from an initial patent to a commercializable product often takes many stages. So you have an initial patent that might be about, oh, we've discovered this small molecule that inhibits a pathway that's important for cancer. That's patent number one, and that comes from a university. A company licenses that patent and then tweaks the design of the drug over and over again until it develops a drug that you can take as a pill. And then it's going to patent that technology again. And I'm giving a very simple example. Oftentimes those technologies proceed through multiple ways of technology, of IP, intellectual property protection, patenting, before they finally reach their final stage. So my perspective on it is, given the context of our capitalist society, we need to retain financial incentives. There should be expectations for these companies, and you'd have to talk to the politicians to say, is it going to be more effective to go through this patent route, or more effective to think about different kinds of policy approaches? Did that answer? Yes. Okay.
I just want to follow up on that a little bit. Another thing that I think we can do is we can work with different foundations. Like, I am a cancer patient, I'm a scientist. Actually, I did research related to ALS and understanding protein misfolding, and it turns out I have multiple myeloma, so my antibodies misfold now. But basic science has given me options, right? So I now have options for treatment, and I now lead a support group for myeloma patients, which is educationally supported by the International Myeloma Foundation. So I'm lucky that I have a cancer that there's been lots of work. There's multiple myeloma research foundations. There's several different health trees. There's a lot of foundations. So that's something I think you can do if you are passionate about a specific disease, is work with foundations. Because foundations, I think, work to try to connect academics and pharmaceutical companies
At all levels.
At all levels. And then they also do advocacy work on Capitol Hill and try to make sure that everybody can access that treatment, not just people in the clinical trials, and that it's affordable. So I think that's one easy way, like if you have something that you are passionate about in your heart, that you can sort of work with foundations to try to keep them talking to the government and talking to the pharmaceutical companies and the academics, because we need all of them.
Absolutely,
Right.
Really amplifying that. Everything that happens at a policy level is going to happen because someone is advocating for it. And the foundations are the advocacy for exactly the question you have, which is, how do we get these treatments to really benefit patients, not line the pockets of pharmaceutical companies? And that's a really great suggestion that I'm going to add to my final slide about what can you do. Okay.
I just wanted to point out that one of the unique things about the United States is that law prohibits the Medicare system from negotiating drug prices. And so that's a political problem
Yeah.
that, of course, if it were solved, would reduce drug prices.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, so moving forward, so it's kind of the basics of how NIH works, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about how this scientific work, it's not just about, also about the medical context and the medical endeavor. So what do we as scientists do? Again, I've got a relative who just always asks me what class I teach. And I'm like, well, I don't teach a class. But, you know, we do discovery work, we observe, we test hypotheses, we design new technologies. I think everybody's familiar with that function. The second bullet point is really, really important and something that I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about with respect to our medical system, our hospitals and medical schools, which is that we're responsible for training. Not just, I don't just mean classroom instruction, that's a part of it. I mean actual training and skills about how do you implement scientific work, how do you do so rigorously, how do you test a hypothesis, how do you perform this assay, what are the preclinical models to model this disease, how do you decide if a therapy is tolerable or not. All of those kinds of skill sets are trained within scientific laboratories. And we do this training not just for undergraduate students, we do this training at all levels, all the way up through the faculty careers. And this importantly includes clinicians. So MDs that train at medical schools are also receiving training from the researchers and the scientists that form the infrastructure of that medical school. They're engaging in summer research projects, mentored projects, driving towards specific research ideas that they're excited about, and all of that happens within the context of NIH funding. The individuals that we train, no matter where they are in their career stage, whether they stay in research or not, they're going to take that research knowledge forward. And you can see I've listed a few examples here. I said these individuals will move on to careers in STEM, of course, but also law, policy, and medicine, even economics. You've got lots and lots of folks who are on their way through some kind of educational journey. And when they train in an environment in which research is done, they're going to get that training to understand how to do science rigorously, what the scientific issues are, and then they can bring that forward into their future careers. The third bullet point is a little bit of a nuanced note about the uniqueness of research programs. So, you know, I gave you my 3-slide spiel about the things that I care about. I could spend hours talking about it. My science is just one example. Every scientist does something unique. And if we all did the same thing, nobody would ever get any grants ever, and science and medicine technology would never, ever progress. Our system is driven by the need to develop unique capabilities, to be able to do certain things that other laboratories and other institutions cannot do. And what that means is that the way that our experiences are as scientists is that we're basically developing these networks all across the country and across the globe of, look, if I need to do MALDI imaging, I know I have to go to Natalie Agar at Harvard. If I want to do phage biopanning in the brain, I have to go to my collaborator Sarah Stabenfeld at Arizona State. It's a very real issue about the uniqueness of these research programs. And I'm sure you can imagine where I'm going, which is that when you pull one node out of that interconnected network, the damage goes a lot further than the loss of that single research program. It's almost like a Jenga tower, and we're kind of at this point, we're starting to poke holes in it, and we're seeing investigators leave and programs close, and at a certain point, everything is going to destabilize. So I really want to highlight the importance of the uniqueness of research programs and the way that that makes us all interdependent on one another. We also provide service, and I would give today's lecture as an example of service. Everybody's thanking me for this, but this is my job. It's my job to engage with the community. It's my job to engage with students. It's my job to support my institution, my state. It's my job to do service for NIH. It's a huge component of what we do as academics, and it's actually a major way that we are judged. When we go up for promotion or for tenure, there's an entire category called service. And the question is, what have you done to take your work forward to serve the communities that have funded you, that have supported your research endeavor? This is a really big part of what we do. I don't want this to be a pitiful slide. I wanted to highlight, there's a little bit of a defensive reaction. It's really, really hard to hear Republicans talk about lazy scientists. I kind of go a little crazy in my head, and I think most scientists do. I want to highlight that this is not an easy occupation. This is a lifestyle. This is something that people dedicate their lives to. I love my job. I have no regrets about dedicating my life to this. But this is not a 9-to-5 situation. This is not 40 hours a week. This is not something where I can go away and somebody can replace me. I mean, if I'm getting, really deep in the weeds, the number of personal difficulties that I've been through, deaths in the family, health issues for my husband, there's no time off. There's absolutely no time off. I took 8 weeks of maternity leave for my first kid, no maternity leave for my second or third. It's not possible. That's the nature of science in America. It's that competitive and that difficult that it takes an incredible amount of personal effort. So the point that I wanted to really highlight here is about the budgets and why we're under so much pressure all of the time. So why am I working this hard? The reason that I'm working and my colleagues are all working this hard is because of how competitive it is already to get funding. We are typically operating on razor-thin budgets. I employ 7 full-time efforts in my lab. I'm a pretty well-funded investigator. I'm established. I'm stable. I'm in a very fortunate position. And I am always 6 months to 2 years away from utter collapse because that's how it works. I have to juggle multiple grants covering different people, different projects, all moving at different paces. And those grants, there's a long lead up to get funding for a project. So I might spend 1 to 2 years acquiring preliminary data. And that assumes that I've already got somebody who's hired and trained and I'm paying their salary and they can do the work. So we spend 1 to 2 years with an initial hypothesis, an idea that we test, we need to show proof of principle, and then eventually, hopefully, after that couple years have passed, we've got the preliminary data. At that point, I would submit a grant to NIH. The NIH review process, in the best case scenario, from start to finish, best case scenario is 9 months later, I might be able to get funding. But that's not usually how it works. Usually you put a grant in, it goes through this 9-month cycle of review, you get comments back, you rewrite it, you put it in again. You rewrite it, you put it in again. I had to put my first project idea, I put into NIH 6 times before it got funded. And that now is the absolute infrastructure of my unique research program dedicated to drug delivery in pediatric brain tumors. There's no other program that is uniquely doing that. So this is a very long-term scenario with a lot of short-term risk, where we hire someone based on the funds we have available, but then we're frantically competing for additional grant dollars to ensure that that work can continue and expand. So no scientific free lunch, and the idea is being that, the idea to take home is that most research labs are kind of intermittently in precarious situations. Every kind of cycle, every year that goes by, we have different kinds of worries and pressures. So how does NIH support all of this? Yeah.
You had peer review on this.
Mm-hmm.
What did you want to say about peer review?
Yeah, so I've got another slide on peer review that I'll talk about. I wanted to highlight the intensity of peer review. That's part of the timeline to getting the grant. So when we submit that grant, it goes out to a panel of scientists to study section at NIH. And that peer review process is when our colleagues and our peers critique in detail the contents of that grant and then score it by various criteria, which then determines whether the grant is going to get funded or not. So peer review is the big part of this, of developing our ideas rigorously so that the scientific community agrees that this is valuable work and can move forward. Obviously, there's been some attacks on peer review, right? Because there's these claims by the MAGA folks that scientists are biased and that we're withholding cures and that we're smashing science that would otherwise be impactful. I can tell you, I've been a standing study section member, served at NIH for standing for almost 4 years and did ad hoc work for several years prior to that. It is the most inspiring experience I've ever had. The people who do peer review for NIH, they are volunteering their time like nothing you've ever seen. We do it 3 times a year. It takes about 80 hours each time we do it, and we really don't get any compensation or any cookies for it. It doesn't help us. We do it because we want to make the science better. And that peer review is conducted in a room typically full of 30 other scientists. 30 other voices contributing their diverse perspectives and scientific opinions on something. And so I want to emphasize that peer review is an intense process, but I don't think that it should be the target of what's going on right now, because it's not the thing that's flawed. We're not suppressing anything. Everybody in that room is looking at the data, and they're looking at the figures, and they're saying, did they have a positive control? Did they have a negative control? Did they validate their assay? Did they read literature? Did they incorporate that recent publication that came out in 2023? Does their collaborator actually have the expertise needed to implement the assay? Those are the questions we ask in peer review. It is not a suppression of the scientific hypothesis, but an evaluation of the quality and rigor of what they're proposing to do.
Could you make a comment? I have a couple of people in my life that, really, they used to enjoy going to the publicly available papers, research papers, and being able to review them. And it seems as though they're very frustrated because it's been really tightened up, the access to the research.
Do you mean the journal articles or the peer review sessions?
The journal articles.
The journal articles. Oh, I'm interested to hear that, because there has been a huge movement in the field. I want to say it was about 10 years ago. I'm not sure of the timing. When NIH required that NIH-funded studies must be publicly available. They must be publicly available. And that means that we have a repository of, it's called open access, where these manuscripts, after an embargo period has passed, it's typically 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months, usually about a year, all work that's NIH funded is deposited on a publicly accessible server and can be read.
So, but it has to be after the fact?
Correct. And I would support that as a scientist, which is, if you asked me 6 months ago what I thought about my data, it's going to change in 6 months. And so it is very important that when work is published, that it is a rigorous and robust interpretation of the data. I actually, for what it's worth, I hate preprint servers, for those of you that are familiar with preprints. So preprints are when you upload the manuscript before it's gone through peer review at a journal. I think that that has done terrible things for science. I understand the motivation. We want open access, but at the same time, it puts words out there before they've had an opportunity. Those interpretations can mature and become finalized.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sort of limits individuals that maybe have some form of cancer that there's not a lot of information available on, and,
Yeah. I'm surprised. I would love to help you. I would love to help you debug that, because it is all publicly available, and it may be that those individuals aren't searching the right servers. Yeah.
I'm a librarian, I'm a research librarian, so I know this issue pretty well. It's more complicated than you're saying. There is an embargo period, and that embargo period is a period where peer-reviewed literature is not available to people who have taxpayers who have paid for it. And my understanding of the field is that the primary reason for that is not some sort of, let's just wait and see some longer period of time, but the 38% plus profit margins
Absolutely.
that commercial
Academic publishers are evil.
publishers
Absolutely.
are bent on receiving. So among the many other things going on in our government is that there has been a movement, several years long movement, to reduce that embargo to 0 days, 0 months, 0 years. And it's up in the air right now. It's very unlikely that in this administration we'll see that happen. But the memo, the Nelson Memorandum, was supposed to take effect in 2026. So I think you're right. I think that literature should be available, and the only way you can get at it is through a library, whether it's your public library, interlibrary loan, or through a research library if you happen to have access to one that has a subscription to that literature. But it's a huge issue. It's a huge problem. You lock up knowledge, and you are locking out people and possibilities. Yeah. And that includes the global south and all those other people in the world who also cannot afford that literature.
As somebody who worked at an institution that did not have access to the standard scientific publications, I agree it's a massive issue. I do want to emphasize that that embargo period, that's still within 1 year, that publication must be publicly available. And no, I mean, it is. I get emails, trust me, I get massive bureaucratic emails if I have not confirmed that my access is public at that point in time, and I hear you that it should be shorter, and I would love to see that, but I want to make sure we address that if somebody is feeling that the majority is not accessible, that it may be a question of how they're searching for that information, because anything after that embargo period, by law and for the sake of my job, has to be available. I'm not eligible for funding if it isn't publicly available. I can't get the next year in my grant if during that prior year period I do not demonstrate that it's been uploaded to a public server.
I also just want to add that preprint servers are not a mistake. They have a function. They have a very important function in sharing research with the world and in fact getting feedback on research through other processes than the conventional review system that we described. So don't think preprint servers are bad.
I do have a different perspective, but I respect yours.
On your field and what the stakes are and so on, but there are preprint servers in every discipline, and they are widely used and they're very important.
I might give the example, preprints are what caused the obsession over ivermectin, for instance. Okay, so it is a very nuanced subject, and I can both respect the drive for the public to see those results before they've been peer reviewed, but I'm just going to put it simply, there is a lot of really, really bad science that exists on preprint servers. So maybe just my message there would be to be aware of that when evaluating the data.
So I should also point out that a lot of, with journal publishing, the idea is somebody has to pay the cost. And in a lot of journals, we're going to an open access model. And when you have an open access journal, it means that the people submitting the work have to pay the fee. The fee for a relatively low-cost open access journal would be $2,500.
Yep.
If you're going for a nature family, this is the real, the really high-impact journals, you could be paying $7,000 or $8,000 for the open access.
It is an
fee.
evil. It really is. I'm going to use that word. It's atrocious.
But once that fee is paid, anybody can.
I pay
access
open
it.
access, so I pay open access for all of my publications. It is very, very ridiculous, and the people that we need to go after are the publishing companies that are making so much money.
But the public can access all of your papers because you are paying those fees.
Correct.
Hold on, Dawn, hold on.
Yeah, I'll get there. Yeah, I will get there. Yep. He asked about the immigration policies with respect to staffing.
Okay. Anyone else?
So when we think about the way in which NIH is involved in these aspects of training, education, and scientific work across so many institutions, what's important to understand is that almost every experience that you've had within a medical context has in some way or another involved NIH funding. And I gave some examples here, where and on what subjects your doctor received training. The faculty that train MDs are research faculty that are recruited on the basis of their research programs. When those research faculty go away, those subjects are not taught. If you receive care at a hospital that has an associated medical school, you are benefiting at an extraordinary level from the med school's workforce. You're receiving care from the residents that are in training, as well as clinical research professionals, nurses, and staff that are supported oftentimes by NIH grants, particularly in translationally oriented institutions like UMass Chan, where we do a lot of work to bring new therapies to the clinic. NIH invests quite a bit in enabling that process and supporting the research professionals that do that. The clinical trials that you enroll in and either directly or indirectly benefit from, the recommendations that your doctors make for your medical treatment are based on the results of those research studies. And the clinical trials that are reported in literature are written by MDs. that may or may not have research training. If they do not have research training, I would argue that there's a potential there for that research result to be less rigorous. It requires a lot of engagement of collaborators and scientists to ensure that data are interpreted properly. The diagnostic and therapeutic technologies, we talked about that bit, and the nurses and clinical research professionals. So the point that I want to make here is that a major function of NIH has to do with the workforce pipeline, which is ensuring that from the undergraduate through the professional level that we are actively training and engaging these individuals in scientific work to understand how to rigorously test hypotheses, how to rigorously evaluate data. And what we're doing right now is destroying that foundation. And the reason that it's important to think about it from a workforce pipeline perspective is that we will not be seeing the damage from this for at least another 5 to 10 years, when now we have new crops of MDs and other clinical professionals that have not had the opportunity to receive this training. So we talked about peer review a little bit. So peer review is rigorous. The institutions submit the grants to federal agencies. Those grants are reviewed by study sections. Typically, study sections are composed of up to 30 individuals, MDs, PhDs, folks that are very experienced in the field and that represent a diversity of scientific opinions. There are people whose entire jobs at NIH are focused on ensuring that those study sections are balanced in perspective and that they are run smoothly. Once a grant goes to study section, it gets sent out to the reviewers. When I sit on study section, I'll review up to 10 grants around. Each grant will take me up to about 8 hours to review in depth. So these grants are hundreds of pages long. We review every aspect of that work. Mostly we're evaluating the data and the strength of the hypothesis. So we're saying, have they given me a reason to believe that doing this work will advance medicine and technology or have an impact in a positive way on my field? So we're looking at data, we're looking at the proposed research plan, we're looking at infrastructure, collaborators, qualifications, we're looking to see that they are rigorous, validated, testing hypotheses in multiple ways. It's a very, very deep review that occurs. So that happens 3 times per year. Once the primary reviewers have reviewed those grants, done that deep, deep dive, we write a summary of our critiques, which are then made available to the entire study section. The grants are preliminarily ranked, and 50% of them are tossed out the window without further review. That's called triage. The 50% that remain have an opportunity to be discussed, which means that we all get together for some 12-hour days, and we sit in a room and we go one by one through about 100 grants. For each grant, we go through a deep dive with the primary reviewers describing strengths and weaknesses, and then panel members will jump in with their own expertise to say, oh, actually, I worked with that assay, or they didn't see that paper that was published recently, that kind of stuff. Those grants get discussed, they get ranked by the entire panel, or they get scored by the entire panel, and then the grants are ranked. Grants are awarded based on what's called percentiling. So we line them all up. If you've got 100 grants, you line them all up. The top 10 will get funded. Another 10 have a chance. So another 10 may be picked up for special programs. If they are a focus of a particular interest by someone at NIH, they will be picked up. So the overall success rate at NIH is about 20%, but the funding pay line is about 10%. And when I started my academic journey, it was 40%. So I just want to put that number out there. It used to be as an academic that you could put in maybe 2 or 3 large grants and expect that one of those would get funded. Now you're expecting to put in probably 8 to 10 applications before you have a chance of getting that work funded. Grants are generally lasting, smaller ones will be about 1 to 2 years, larger ones are typically about 5 years, and each grant will fund, a smaller one maybe part of a person, or a larger one, you might be able to fit 2 to 3 people on that grant. Yeah.
So the numbers of grants that are shrinking, is that because of greater scrutiny or standards or budget cuts?
Not budget cuts. It's a combination of inflation and competition. So I'm going to talk about it here.
Okay.
So the first issue is inflation. So I want you to take a look at this graph. So the y-axis here is the budget of a standard grant. It's called an R01. And that budget was set in 1998 at $250,000. It has never changed since. The graph that you're looking at are the inflation-adjusted value of that grant. So by the time we get to 2024, that grant that used to have purchasing power of $250K now only has purchasing power of $130K. If I hire a research technician who costs me $60K and her fringe and salary add another $30K on that, I'm already at $90K for one person to do the work. You can see that the size of this grant, the fact that it is shrinking over time, is posing a very serious problem to individual investigators. The one on the right is also an inflationary graph. In this case, this is the total NIH budget. And this is a talking point where particularly right-wingers like to put this up and look at the dark blue line, that's the NIH budget in the dollars, and you think, oh, wow, like it's going up over time. But when you adjust for inflation, you're now looking at the light blue line. And basically, since the early 2000s, we had seen this big expansion of budget. Since the early 2000s, the inflation-adjusted NIH budget has tanked. During that time, research activities have expanded. And so to answer your question, it's a combination of inflation, stagnant pay lines, stagnant budgets, and just an extraordinary wealth of quality science that there's not enough money to go around. So who pays for research if NIH doesn't? And this is the most common critique, right? We're saying, why can't these institutions pay for research? They've got these big endowments. Why doesn't that work? And the first thing that's really important to understand, I actually meant to put this one first, is that institutions, in fact, are doing their part. It is an absolute myth that institutions are spending less on research dollars. The federal investment has been flatlined, and the institutional investment has risen. So what you're looking at here is on the y-axis, it's the percent of funding that comes from different sources, basically how much of that research is funded in different ways. This green flat line at the bottom, that's the federal contribution to research activities. The blue line is institutes of higher education. Every single year, institutions have invested greater and greater dollars. And something that is not widely talked about, but that is an irrefutable fact, is that all institutions operate research at a loss. They are all losing money on their research endeavor. Universities do not make money on research. It's not economically possible, and when you see these kinds of graphs and you see that their investment is rising, hopefully that helps to convince you. All institutions pay for the privilege of doing research, and they do this because it elevates the overall quality of the institution and helps them to recruit talented students and faculty. So they are paying into these research programs. So who pays if NIH doesn't? So I want to give the example. I'm going to start with UMass Chan as an example. So that's my medical school. What are the sources of revenue for a medical school? We've got a little bit of stuff that comes from our hospital, right? But we can't use clinical care dollars to do research. That would be fraudulent. We can't use insurance reimbursable money to do research. Doesn't do anything for us. How about student tuition? The entire student body at UMass Chan is 750 medical students. That is not going to cover the dollars and cents needed to do research. Then we have an endowment. And endowments sound really great. They seem like these enormous buckets of money that we should be able to tap. But I want to run through some of the actual math here. So UMass has an endowment of $1.5 billion. That covers 5 universities and 3 hospitals. I want you to just pretend we're talking about the universities and divide it by 5. That endowment is worth $300 million. What's a return on an endowment? You can't touch the principal, right, because that's what's generating money. You can only draw the income, which is typically at about 5%. So if you take that $400 million and you say that's the endowment, but I'm only getting 5% of that every year, and then you look at some of the policies that NIH is implementing right now. For instance, this indirect cost cut is going to cost us, I put it up there, I didn't put it up there. We are facing a $50 million loss from the IDC cuts. We are already $30 million in the hole from the delays on the grant funding. So we've got an $80 million deficit to cover and a $400 million endowment. It's not going to fix the problem. This is an annual problem. It's not, we can't just use the endowment money. So then you think, okay, well, what about these really ridiculous endowments? right? Like Harvard, come on, $40 billion. Well, the other thing about endowments is they're not actually one bucket of money. An endowment consists of hundreds of separate donor accounts that are dedicated to particular purposes. All of this information is publicly available if you Google it. In Harvard's case, they have a $40 billion endowment, but 80% of those funds are legally committed to other purposes. We can't take money that somebody said they wanted for a gymnasium with their last name on it and suddenly go and fund science research with that. It's not legally allowed. It's not possible. So when you do the math and you take that $40 billion, you say 80% of it is restricted, 5% drawdown on that. That's $400 million. But you know what that $400 million is doing? Funding science research. That is a major aspect of what endowment income is used for. How do they make up for the fact that they have to pay for the privilege of doing research? They're already using their endowments for it. I don't have an exact number to tell you what percentage of that 400 million is dedicated to science, but I'm very, very certain that a decent percentage is. Regardless, the current attack on Harvard has put $2 billion on hold. Their endowment can't save them. Now, Harvard is actually doing the right thing. They are doing this right now. They are cashing out their endowment. They are leaning into this. They are putting all of their investments, taking it out of the stock market and liquidating so that they can fight the federal government right now. Harvard is one of the few places that can actually manage to fight that fight. So they're fighting that fight, but the point I want to make is that is not a sustainable solution. It's not going to be possible for Harvard to spend $2 billion from its endowment every year and survive as a research-intensive institution. And more importantly, Harvard's endowment is ridiculous, okay? It's the biggest in the country. There are only a handful of institutions that have endowments this large. And in fact, even for the example of UMass that I gave you, here $1.5 billion. But that's covering all of these campuses, all of these educational and research programs. So it's really not a feasible solution. Okay, so let's talk about IDC rates. When I was a graduate student at Yale, I did a lot of political organizing. Do you know what I organized around? What a crock IDCs were. Oh, how I laugh now. Okay, I know a little bit better. So it sounds really, really bad. It sounds so bad when you hear it. So an institution has a 65% IDC rate. That means when I request $100,000 from NIH, my institution gets an additional $65,000 on top of it. Sounds pretty good, right? And we already talked about what IDCs are used for. They're used to support the infrastructure. They're used to pay for things like the lighting and the janitorial service, our Wi-Fi. They support our animal vivarium. If I need to do tumor treatment studies, I have to have a veterinary staff and a facility in which I can actually take care of those mice in a humane manner. They support our regulatory agencies. So we have, environmental safety and health, managing all of the chemical exposures we might have, ensuring our fume hoods are in compliance, and that the viruses that we work with aren't going to leak out and go to the rest of the community. All of those aspects of doing science are covered by these IDC rates. So the first thing I want to emphasize is that IDCs are a necessary cost of doing research. They do not pay for new, fancy, flashy things. They are negotiated every few years with federal agents down to the square foot. And it depends on how much space you have and what core facilities you maintain. So institutions that have, say, a microscopy facility, I can go and use that microscopy facility and spend $50 an hour instead of spending $400,000 to buy a new confocal. That's a core facility. So as institutions grow this infrastructure, that's what IDCs are paying for, is the overall context in which we are doing science. So one is IDCs actually are scientific work. The second is that 65% is a total misnomer. So this is a little bit hard of a graph to read, but I'll try to explain it. Here on the bottom, you have percentages from 0 to 100%. At the top are examples. Each bar is an example of an IDC rate. So you can see one all the way up at 80%, something at 74%, all the way down. Those seem like really big numbers, but IDCs are calculated off of what's called a modified cost base. You cannot pay for tuition, patient care, purchase of equipment. There's a whole list of things that you cannot get an IDC for. In fact, when we go to these publicly accessible databases, any citizen in the US has full access to every aspect of this data. You can see how much money went to each institution and how it was split between DCs and IDCs. Institutions that are clinically productive or medical schools that are heavy have so many excluded costs that their IDC rates are inflated. Their actual receipt of IDCs all come down to about 30%, no matter where you're at. So when you hear an 80% IDC rate, a 60% IDC rate, that's not the actual amount of money that the government is giving. In fact, for that $100,000 grant, they're giving $30,000 to support all of the staff that are necessary for me to run my research program. Okay, so what's actually happening? This is the simplest way I have to explain it. So these are two graphs where the y-axis shows the amount of funding that's been released, and the x-axis shows the time. So you can see February, March, April, we're proceeding through the year. The blue line on top is fiscal year 2024. The red line is fiscal year 2025. You can see the problem. NIH isn't issuing awards. There's no credit card. There's no credit card. If I don't have that money released to me, I cannot pay my employees and I must fire them. And UMass just fired and furloughed hundreds of staff, scientific staff, because these delays, and you can see my anger, these delays are unsurvivable. There's nowhere that that money can come from. That's somebody's salary. I was forced to furlough people in my lab, and I was faced with the possibility of needing to fire up to 3 to 4 individuals in a span of 2 months. And I am a well-funded investigator, and the crisis that this has caused for my institution makes it impossible for me to do science. And I am not the only one. This is happening across the country. And it's very simple. If half the money is flowing out, that's half the money getting done. That's half the people not getting paid. This is an extraordinarily serious issue.
So, are you and others contacting your legislators and telling your stories?
I am fighting every minute of every day of the last 3 months like my life depended on it. I have not slept more than 6 hours since the start of the year. I go home and cry on a regular basis. I'm being human, but I want to be really, really human. We are fighting for our lives. And that's why I'm here today, to hope to gather other people to fight this fight with us.
I hear what you, yeah. I know our professor, okay? She's had to fire her staff, let go of her staff.
Yeah.
Okay. Why aren't you talking to the press?
I am. I'm all over the press. Google me. I went viral. It was the worst experience of my life. I'm under threat,
Yes.
right?
Yes, I'm sure.
It's extremely risky.
Yep, yep.
It's that you see what has happened to any institution that has gone into the crosshairs of this administration.
Yes.
And that is what scientists are facing. I have gone to the press because, I will be very direct, I study pediatric brain cancer. And I have faith in humanity that they're not going to smear me and destroy my life for it because of the topic that I study. I'm also tenured, stable, and have the support of my institution. I'm in a position to fight. It has been awful on a personal level, but I am doing it, and I have many colleagues that are doing it as well. That said, the vast majority of investigators cannot do it. Anybody studying any of the forbidden topics, can you imagine if they became elevated in the press for caring about DEI and LGBTQ issues,
Yes.
trans rights? We're terrified. But a lot of people are fighting.
Is any of this getting out on Substack?
Yes. So
It is.
it's very interesting to me to hear this because I actually work with a group of faculty that are working really hard on the media question, which is we want to keep this buzzing. We want to keep newspapers writing about this and talking about it and keeping it elevated. In my little closed bubble, it's everywhere. It's every day and it's nonstop. And then I hear from folks where you're not in that bubble and you're not hearing about it. And that's what I hope you will leave here today and know the power that your voices have to take these issues out and help people understand that NIH is being destroyed right now, and if we continue this destruction, that it will harm all of us.
Will you be sending these slides out to all of us present today?
I potentially can. I would have to take a double check to make sure everything is public, that I'm okay with it all
Yes.
being public. I will ask you to maybe contact Kay, and then we'll go through her.
The governor, and what does she say about this?
So what is our legislature doing? We've had incredible support from Jim McGovern particularly. He's done a lot with respect to the overall political situation, but he's also advocating quite a bit on the scientific side. Elizabeth Warren is mostly doing more of the K through 12 educational angle and the international scholar challenges, not NIH specifically. There are people working on this at every level, and yet the more voices that we have, the better. So if you're meeting with Governor Healy, tell her what you learned today and impress on her the importance to you as a constituent that this is a topic you want her to pay attention to. We're all getting flooded, right? It's nonstop barrage of attacks. We have to speak up to make our issues be elevated.
Yep. So the effects of this, though, aren't just limited to like the Chan school,
Yeah.
the
so let's
people
keep
who are
going.
being trained and stuff. This ripples out throughout the community and the business world. I mean, there are restaurants that aren't getting as much business. You use services that may not be able to be purchased anymore. The ripple effects out into the community are perhaps at least as big, relating back to that every dollar that NIH spends generates, is it $2.46?
Yeah.
You know, so this is
The
a
person that-
much bigger deal beyond the boundaries of the campus.
The person that I was forced to furlough is an international scholar and was, potentially, hopefully still will be, an embedded member of our community. If he gets deported, he's no longer a part of our economy.
I just want to ask if do you have an online presence for the issues?
Yes, I'm at Doc Sirianni on Blue Sky, and I've got my contact info on the last slide.
Okay.
Yep. Oh, we've got one more question back there.
So my name is James Miller. I was a journalist, and my funding ultimately was through Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which is the United States government. In 2017, the funding for my magazine, which was focused on Russia, was cut because Donald Trump has significant ties to Vladimir Putin, and that was an unpopular subject. But what happened was lots of other grants were also cut. So the State Department has grants for researchers on certain topics. Those grants were cut. Defense Department, they have grants. Those grants were cut. National Institute for the Arts,
Those grants are cut. Yeah.
So all these various institutions were cut. And what happened was so many of us lost our jobs. And now there are fewer jobs in that field. And now I am competing against all of these other people who are doing that same work. Many of us left the field and have never gone back.
Absolutely.
I left, I don't want to toot my own horn. I was a fairly successful journalist on doing radio and TV regularly about every week. And I had to leave the field and have only sort of peripherally been involved. This will force scientists and doctors out of the field.
I already know people who are leaving.
Yeah, and the thing is, as you're pointing out, because this is so long term, they won't come back, because 10 years from now, when hopefully there's funding again, or 5 years from now, but probably 10 years from now, when there's funding again, their research will no longer be relevant. We're pushing brilliant minds out of science, and it is, if it does not get fixed very soon, permanent.
I mean, when you look at that Nobel laureate graph, right? That's what Germany did, and that was the consequence they faced. And we are doing the same thing right now to our scientific endeavor. And the analogy I make is it's like cutting out an organ and thinking you can reattach it 6 months later. You can't start and stop science. And these are people's lives. And they are leaving, and they will continue to leave. I'm passionate and angry. That's the seriousness of my expression. Was there someone else?
Well, two things. One is thank you so much for what you're doing and the time you're putting into this. And and please let us know some elementary things we can each do, because we can't do a lot sometimes.
Yeah, let's keep moving through this.
The second thing is that I'm a parent of a beautiful human who has autism. And I just want to say, when you talked about, and I don't remember all the acronyms that you were using, but about peer review, about standardization, I believe it was in Great Britain it came out that the vaccines contributed to autism. That was disputed, that wasn't true. Now Kennedy is saying it is. Autism is not a disease.
Yeah.
It is, you were born with it. And it's my life, and I just ask you all, and I think everybody here is doing this anyways, but really help spread the word of the truth and not the lies. Thank you.
100%.
One more.
Hi. My daughter has a close friend who, and I can't remember what university, he's been medical, the same kind of situation that you have. He was going to graduate with his PhD. He was doing research in I think it was a form of blood cancer, and he was supposed to graduate a couple of years ago, but they asked him to stay on and continue his research, which he did for another 2 or 3 years. And now he's been told just recently that he has to stop, he won't get his PhD, and he'll have his master's, and that's it. And on a personal level, this has, it has a potential of ruining
It's devastating.
his life.
My life is being destroyed, and I'm in a good situation. And I say that with full respect for the impact of this to junior trainees and to vulnerable populations. It's unconscionable. So I want to make sure that we run through this because we've spent a lot of time, but I want to make sure that you know what's going on. So first of all is we've got a lot of political attacks, particularly on DEI and accessibility and gender identity. These policies are destroying the ability of NIH to function properly. Access to science and health equity. Health equity is the concept that all individuals, regardless of their circumstance, should be able to access and benefit from health care. There are drugs that work in fundamentally different ways in men versus women. They're metabolized differently. And the toxicities that are posed in men versus women are different. If we don't study this, we don't know it. Right? And we can think of many examples. There are certain biochemistry blood values that are different as a function of race, for instance. These are critically important scientific topics. And it's mandated through agencies like NIH and NSF and other granting agencies that we incorporate access to science, access to healthcare, and questions of who we test things on and how we do this. We have to account for the diversity of our population. Those are congressionally mandated requirements. When I submit a grant, I have to say whether I will test it in male mice or female mice. Because you know how all therapeutics were tested up until about a decade ago? Male mice, right? Now we are required to say, okay, am I going to do it in males? Am I going to do it in females? Am I going to do it in both? And do I have a scientific reason for that assessment? So that's a part of what we do when we write grants. And now NIH is in a situation, all of our federal agencies, where these topics are taboo and where investigators who use certain words, certain terminologies, or are in particular fields of study are simply having their grants taken away, pulled out of review, no trace that they ever existed, wiped from databases. I sat on study section 3 weeks ago, and I had a grant that was about pediatric cerebral malaria, which kills more than 1,400 people, more than 1,400 children a day. That grant disappeared from my review pile 1 week before study section because it had a foreign component. Because who does pediatric cerebral malaria affect? Brown kids and black kids in Africa. I had another grant that had a foreign component. That one was about glioblastoma. Who does glioblastoma affect? It's a brain tumor that mostly hits older white men. And its foreign component was in Spain. Which grant got pulled? It's really, really bad. So there are both policies that are being implemented and a lot of monkey business that's happening around these political ideological topics. The most important thing that happened recently is that NIH now has a policy that when you receive a grant, your institution must sign a statement attesting that they do not engage in any DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. If you have a cultural center, that's DEI. If you have a wheelchair ramp, is that accessibility? I mean, I don't want to fearmonger here, but that's the situation we're in, of looking around and realizing this is indefensible. This is being designed in a way that at any point in time, any individual can accuse an institution of doing DEIA. And if that institution has signed that contract and said, we're not doing it, and someone comes up and says, that's DEI, then their grants get pulled. And this is happening to people in the middle of active projects. This is happening to PhD students that are trying to defend their theses soon. This is happening to investigators where entire fields of study have been closed. It's very bad. The funding delays and slashed indirect costs and budgetary constrictions are what's killing my program. So there is a budget that's out that proposes to contract NIH by 45% and to limit IDCs to 15%. If you limit IDCs to 15%, medical schools will close. We can't operate. There's no way to do it without support from the federal government. And up until recently, that was an investment that our entire country committed to that investment. Our Congress mandated those dollars be spent for these purposes because it's good for all of us. And what they're doing right now is taking it away. There have been mass layoffs at NIH, incredible career scientists, people who worked there for 20 years. Program officer that I know, she's managed the entire nation's brain tumor research portfolio for decades, gone. These are individuals, you cannot replace their expertise or their perspective, their knowledge of the systems, of the grant landscape, of the medical landscape, going away. I want to put up all these details because I want you to believe me, but there's just not enough space on these slides. You're going to have to trust me. Directors and people who are holding upper-level leadership positions are being tossed aside one by one by one and replaced with political appointees. People who have no medical background, people who don't have any experience with science or research, are now in a position of dictating what funding announcements go out, how funding decisions are being made. It's absolutely atrocious. Loss of intramural capacity. Most folks know that you can actually go to NIH to get medical care. There are clinical trials. There are what are called intramural research labs, so like mine, but done within NIH. That program is being crushed as well. The scariest thing is the centralization. So this proposed 45% budget reduction involves a condensation of 27 institutes into 8. I applied to the National Institute of Neurological Disease and Stroke, NINDS. They want to combine NINDS with craniofacial research because apparently everything that's in the head is the same thing. So my grants will be ranked next to orthodontia. There's nothing wrong with orthodontia. We need to fund that. We need to fund that. But this is an asinine, destructive, ridiculous change to make. And it's being made because the people that are making these decisions don't have any knowledge of the systems that they're perturbing. So everything is being centralized. Autonomy of the institutes is being revoked. We see a lot of turnover of personnel and replacement with political appointees. We know that there are focused attacks on undergraduate serving institutions. They are now threatening the accreditation process. So what determines whether an undergrad institution is accredited for their degree or not? If an institution loses accreditation, those students will no longer qualify for Pell Grants or federally subsidized student loans. So when they do this, it's a way to target it in a targeted fashion to simply economically destroy an institution with one swipe. And finally, we have the censorship and deportation of international scholars, which was brought up previously. I hope everyone in this room is aware that people are being snatched off the streets. I have a colleague that I work with very closely at Arizona State. She said that, so we have a light rail. I'm from Arizona. We have a light rail. It's a little train that runs around the downtown area to campus. Turns out the light rail is federal property. They've posted ICE and law enforcement agents to ticket jaywalkers getting off the light rail, so now they have a federal offense, and then those students are being deported. This is a first-hand account. This is not rumor mill. This is what they're doing. We know that they are taking students from the streets, and I can tell you that the international scholars that work in my lab are terrified. I am terrified on their behalf. It's absolutely unacceptable. Okay, so what's happening? What is already happening right now? I'm fascinated to learn from you all how much of this you're familiar with. So first of all, we have closure of graduate admissions at many institutions. Lots of graduate programs are closing up. We have some departments, usually not the hard sciences, but more of like the peripheral humanities departments that relied on the financial support from the hard sciences. We're seeing some departments begin to close. We are seeing closure and withdrawal of research programs across the country. We are seeing something that nobody wants to or can talk about, which is the closure or slowing down of clinical trials. This is happening for multiple nebulous reasons. So one is the work that would be proceeding is not happening at the pace it should. The other is that the personnel that are typically supported by NIH grants within the medical infrastructure, we've got layoffs, furloughs, hiring freezes. We can't keep our institutions staffed fully when we have this level of crisis going on nationally. I'm just speaking in very general terms right now, that this is something that's insidious, that is happening across the country. Every reporter I talk to says, tell me the clinical trial that closed about pediatric brain tumors. I'm like, A, no one's going to own up to it if it's happening. But B, what's happening is a lot less direct than that, but it's no less significant, which is the entire endeavor is under threat, panicking, and shrinking as we try to survive the current storm. We have loss of personnel. I mentioned my institution is just one example. It's happening across the country, hundreds of layoffs. Johns Hopkins, at Harvard, at all of these large research-intensive places. Spending freezes, where we're not allowed to actually spend the dollars we have. Hiring freezes, we're losing a generation of researchers. We've had a nearly total stop to funding of training grants, postdocs and graduate students. Major, 50% slowdown in the overall award of research grants. We've had immediate closure of projects. I know people who have received cease and desist orders, literally overnight. Censorship, removal of publications. They're targeting journals now with making them sign statements about what articles they will accept for publication or not. There are internal NIH, or I think it's actually CDC, I'm not positive. There was a CDC publication where they withdrew all of the PDFs that were on trigger words. They took them off of the databases, so you can't even download that manuscript anymore. We know that they've been taking resources that have been built with federal tax dollars, and they've been taking those databases down, removing terms like gender, identity, for instance, messing with these things, and then trying to put them back up. I mean, these are resources that we paid for. As taxpayers, they are stealing it from out from underneath us.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to add that it's not only academia, that the pharmaceutical companies are contracting now.
Absolutely.
Now, too. I mean, people don't like pharmaceutical companies, but that area is being
My friends are
affected as
losing-
well.
yeah.
And I have colleagues that don't want to travel. I actually report into Germany, and my boss is getting pushback about coming into the
About not
country.
traveling, yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to impact business as well.
This is a trickle down, trickle up situation, and I'm hearing the same thing from my friends in industry. I know several people who've lost their jobs. The international scholars at risk in my group are desperate to secure industry positions, and there's absolutely no chance at this point because it's just shrinking.
I just have a question. I'm a retired healthcare worker. I worked at Beth Israel for 30 years, and I worked in Virginia for 5. I worked in interventional radiology as an X-ray tech. So I'm here because of my experience in healthcare. My question is, what do you think is their ultimate goal in doing all this? I have an
Yeah.
idea.
What do I think it is?
Yeah, I have a good idea, but I want to know what you think their ultimate goal is, because the way all this disheartening information, what's going on right now with this administration,
Where does it go?
as far as I'm concerned, we're going back 100, 150 years if this continues.
Yeah.
That's where he wants to go. And
Let me ask you this. In history, can you call to mind any other examples of when a government attacked academics and what happened next?
well, Hitler did. Hitler.
It is the playbook. We are literally watching the playbook happen. They go after academics first, always. And that is the argument that I would make. What is the end goal? Two things are what's driving them? Two things, I think. You're just asking my personal opinion. Retribution for COVID is a huge part of it. That's a huge aspect of Trump's support for going after NIH and this whole right-wing movement, this idea that NIH is a corrupt endeavor. That is absolutely about retribution. But the themes are much bigger than that, and I would encourage anybody interested in this to read up on Peter Thiel and the Dark Enlightenment. And this is a political philosophy that claims that academics are in cahoots with the liberal media to indoctrinate our country with the religion of science. Please, everybody should be laughing at this. It's insanity. But it is what they are doing and what they are going after. And when you look at J.D. Vance, he calls on this political philosophy in this guy. And you look at Elon Musk wearing a black MAGA on a black hat. Dark MAGA? Yeah. What do I think that's about?
Yeah.
They have united multiple political philosophies under an entire umbrella. And the agenda, in my mind, is very simple, which is they want to take away the power from academic institutions. They want to put them under their thumb, and they want their population to be less educated, for there not to be free speech, and for there not to be dissemination of knowledge, because all of those things would stop them from achieving their political objectives. We can't.
We can't.
American people cannot let that happen. I feel very strongly about this. I also was an Air Force veteran for 6 years, so I swore the same oath. I swore the same oath that those people did. And I will fight for my country and for the people because I love my country. So, thank you. I get emotional because I do care. And
Yeah. We all do. I love my country.
Yeah.
I went to a rally on Wednesday and gave a small speech there, and the entire point of what I talked about was to get to the end and say, you know what, you think I'm here because I'm a scientist, right? And I'm talking about my science, and I'm passionate about that, and I care about my research program. I'm really here as a neighbor, a community member, a constituent, a citizen of this country, and a mom whose kids deserve a future, like all children in this country, in which they live in a democratic society where their rights are protected.
Right. But what they're doing now is and if I can regress a little, as far as the historical aspect of what they're doing with DEI and everything else, they want to whitewash everything and make America look like it was goody two-shoes. But America is, without history, we are nothing. History is us. We are our history. We have to look back on that to go forward into the future. If we don't know, if people don't know what the past was like, then it's over. You never learn anything. So all this, everything, and this is why I say the American people across the country cannot let this happen.
Can't. I appreciate those thoughts so much, because my hope for today was to teach everyone a little bit something about NIH, but really to make sure that people understand that what's happening to NIH and what's happening to academia is the playbook that will extend to our entire country. And I cannot imagine a scenario in which these attacks stop just at academics. Why would they stop at academics?
Well, the next thing is going to be what all dictators do, and I call them a dictator.
Yeah.
Is imprisonment of people, execution, and mass murder. And whether anyone wants to believe that or not, it will happen, and it will happen down the road. Once all this other stuff is done first, he will do exactly as I said, like every other dictator has done. And that's the truth. And so we have to stop this guy.
Yeah.
And honestly, if the American people have to rise up and get a backbone and sacrifice and suffer like our previous Americans have in the past, and if blood has to be shed, then I'm all for it. I will die for my country. I'm all for it, and that's my opinion. But I think I'm right.
Oh, you're right. There's a fantastic article, and I can, if you approach me afterwards, I'll send you the link. It is a long read, but it was out in The Guardian today, and it's talking about the ideology of Peter Thiel and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and all these guys. And they believe that we're approaching a time in our society where pandemics and climate change and all these issues that have gone unresolved for so long are now coming to a head. And the options available to us are fix them so that we can all enjoy a society that is good and prosperous and better for our kids, or make as much money as you can and let everyone burn. Elon Musk wants to build a colony on Mars because he wants you dead, sir. He does not care about you. He does not care about anyone here. That's right. And so there is one of the reasons why they're attacking academics. Academics help people, right? We're talking about an altruistic idea. We help people. Teachers help people. Asylum programs, they help people in need. But if you start attacking the idea that I owe anyone anything, then what you do is you create this idea, well, you know what? If I have a lifeboat and the ship goes down, I don't have to put you on the lifeboat. I don't owe you anything. I'm going to take this lifeboat by myself, even though there's plenty of room, and I'm going to let you drown. And that's okay. That's morally correct. That is the argument that they're setting up. And I'll tell you, we were talking about clinical trials. In the last year and a half, I have 3 family members, all of whom are under 70 years old, one of whom is under 50, all of them life saved by clinical trials, okay? Look around. Multiple people in this room will die because of these cuts. I may die because of these cuts. My children may die because of these cuts. And if someone stood outside your house, if your neighbor every day got up and fired a gun into your house, and then the next day he fired a gun into your house, and then the next day he fired a gun into your house, you would act because eventually you or your family members will be killed by that action. This is going to kill me or my family members.
So what can each of us
What can we do? Okay, so you see I've got a list of things. There's nothing unexpected here. So I'm going to run through the list and then talk a little bit more deeply. So talking to people, very, very real. This is the power we have. We have the power of our voices. And earlier I talked about, in my bubble, it's everywhere. And yet there are people here that haven't heard it. You know, I was on NPR, I was in the Washington Post, and still, and I'm just one. I mean, there's tons of buzz going on, and yet still so much of our country is locked away in these social media bubbles where we're only hearing the echo chamber of the things that we're immediately exposed to. So the number one charge for anybody in this room is to make sure that the people in your life are aware NIH is being attacked. This is harming science and medicine. If it continues, I mean, I would say at this point the damage is already, some of it's irrevocable. If it continues, it will destroy the infrastructure of medicine in this country and will directly harm you, is probably already directly harming you in the future. So the first thing is to talk about it. Speaking to your legislature matters quite a bit. So being in Massachusetts when this first happened, I thought, oh, I don't need to call my senators and representatives. Heck, this is Massachusetts, right? Like, we care about STEM. In fact, what I've learned is that they are so overwhelmed by the incredible volume of attacks going on in every part of our society. Actually, you'd be surprised that there are a lot of elected representatives who have no idea why this is such an important thing. Talking to your legislature is a major thing you can do. Call every day. Their aides are adding up little check boxes of who called on this topic, who called on this topic, what do our constituents care about. If you care about this, and I hope you do, let your legislature know. Additionally, tell them when they do a good job. Tell them when they do something you like. The first thing I did after Cory Booker did his 25-hour thing is I went straight to his website and I donated money because I wanted to send the message loud and clear, more of this, do this, please. Writing op-eds is a remarkably powerful action that anybody in this could take. There's a movement called, I think it's Hometown Science. If you reach out to me, I'll find it. It's basically helping people write op-eds for their local newspapers. Okay, so you can write something for the Northborough News, whatever it is. I don't live here, so I don't know the name of it. But you speak about it from a personal perspective. You don't need to be a scientist to talk about this. You can say, you know what, my family member benefited from the care that they received on this particular thing in 2015, and I know they would not be here today if not for that medical capability. What's happening right now is harming all of us. And you get the message out there. So op-eds are a big one. Pay attention for calls to action. So I am uncomfortably on social media. I actually hate this. I like giving talks and engaging with people. I despise social media. But I am trying really, really hard to use platform because this thing went viral and I've got a bunch of followers now. So I do issue a lot of information and keep the news cycle current through my Blue Sky account. I can also direct you to other people to follow. There are far better people than myself to follow. And if you join Blue Sky, you can find what are called starter packs. So go find a science starter pack and you click on it and you click follow all and it'll have you follow, like 50 people or however many are on there. And then you're going to get the news in your social media every day. But the big thing is, how do we talk to people? How do we do this, right? This is really, really hard. I'm going to tell you what I want to do as a scientist, which is I want to argue. I want to say, here's the evidence, and I'm right and you're wrong. Does not work. That's not going to work, right? Because at this point, our society is fighting about basic facts of reality. And if we can't even agree on what reality is, I'm never going to convince a non-believer that it's worthwhile to protect NIH. When I had this post go viral about pediatric brain cancer research and I was shutting down my lab, I had somebody posted it on their personal page and they somehow found my email address. And it was a mother. She emailed me. She said, I'm a mother. My child died from a pediatric brain tumor a few years ago. I put your post on my social media page and everybody's telling me it's fake news and that you don't exist and that you're lying. And I just wondered if you could confirm whether this is true or not. I'm like, holy cow. That's on a personal Facebook page. She wasn't a representative. That was simply conservative people to a mother who had lost a child, calling into question the veracity of something that with one Google would have shown up as true, would have identified who I am, my media presence, all of that. So anyway, it's tempting, but that's not going to solve it. What people tell me, and I'm not an expert, but speaking with people who have experience in political science and the media news cycle, is they say you have to help people recognize the underlying motivation. Why would they attack NIH? Oh, NIH doesn't do anything. Actually, NIH enables this, this, and this. Why would they attack NIH? Why would a government go after the very same thing that makes its country great? You get people to question the theme rather than the specifics. Now, I don't pretend to be successful at this, but I know that that's how I'm trying to do it, which is to raise questions again about the underlying motivation to help people realize that what's going on at Harvard isn't actually about anti-Semitism at all. It's not about DEI at all. It's about the government wanting to take down an institution that's bothering them because they think it has too much power. So that's the best message I can give to you in terms of what you can do within your own sphere. I put at the bottom, do something that makes you uncomfortable. This is my challenge to myself, is if I'm comfortable, I'm not pushing the needle. Because this is really uncomfortable. This requires difficult conversations. This requires stepping out of our comfort zone, requires doing something risky. I'm going to add the caveat of only do things that you can do and do so safely, and nobody should be putting themselves at risk, especially in this climate. But challenge yourself to ask yourself, what can I do? What voice do I have? What people do I know? What newspaper can I connect with? What legislature can I call? What governor can I meet with? All of that. When you meet with Governor Healy, we have a group of intramural NIH scientists that are trying very hard to get campus visits. Because NIH is under gag order, an absolute lockdown. They are searching people's cars when they pull up. It's crazy. And they can't even talk about this with the press. The person I talked to was told point blank, if I see your name in news media again, you're fired. It's done. They can't talk. So what we're trying to do is get our elected officials to actually attempt to visit the NIH campus and go for a tour and see what they find and have the conversations that these people can't have with media. So you could say that to Healy, and if she's interested, I can connect you directly with somebody who can make that happen. Yeah.
Is that any more comments or questions?
I have one last comment. Rachel, where do you think the money that's being diverted from all the NIH grants is going?
God, it's pennies. Let's talk about that for a second. It's pennies. 0.7, it doesn't even matter because it's 0.7% of our total national budget is NIH, and we're talking about saving 0.3%. What are they using it for? We know what they're using it for, which is just redirecting all of this to tax cuts for the wealthy, defense projects, and things that the majority of our country probably actually doesn't want to happen.
I'm not talking about just the money going to NIH.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the whole global
Economy? Oh. Well, the global healthcare system, I will add some caveats. There's for-profit insurance companies, right, which a lot of, if you really want to ask me who should the targets be, it should be the publishing companies, the scientific supplying companies, and the insurance companies. Those are the targets that I think we should be going after. I don't have any political perspective on the broader thing. As an individual, I think it's very clear to me that all of this is about lining the pockets of the wealthy and gaining control over people who would otherwise object to that endeavor, and or Russia and all of that. Thank you.